Hey friends, it's Christy. I'm so excited to be back with you on the Lawnfawn YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Life is Good, Smooth Sailing, On the Beach, and Mermaid for You. So I've stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with jet black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm going to start with the top of my lighthouse, and I'm going to use some toner grays for that. I'm using T3, T5, and T7. So that T7 first is going to help me lay in some shadows. I'm also going to color in the door, and then I'm going to blend that out with the T5, putting my shadows on the left-hand side and the highlight on the right, just because it's going to be going on the left-hand side of the card. And then I'm going to blend that out with the T3 for a nice highlight. I'm also going to color the big rock from Mermaid for You. This is going to be down at the base of my lighthouse. And so I'm starting again with that T7, and this time I'm coming in from both sides. I want it to be a little bit streaky since it is natural rock. I don't want it to be perfectly smooth in tone. So just being a little bit less consistent as I feather in those colors, and then adding that T3 once again for a little bit of a highlight. Then I'll jump over to my sailboat, and I'm going to do the mast and the rim of that with these shades, and just start at the top and bottom for the mast and the left and the right for the rim so that my highlight is in the center. Then I'm going to move on to some creamy tones. I'm using E50 and E51 for the white stripes of my lighthouse. So I'm going to add a little of that E51 on the left-hand side, blend that out with the E50, and I'm going to let that fade into white so that it still looks white, but just has a little bit more definition to it. And then I'll also use those shades on the conch shell. Then I'll darken up that combo by using E53, E55, and E57, and I'll do the sand that is in the bucket. And I'm also going to do the trunk of my palm tree. So this time I'm putting my shading on the right-hand side, since the palm tree will end up on the right-hand side of the card. I want to have a central light source. And so I'm just outlining each of the different lines of that with the E57, and then I'll blend out with the other two shades. And I wanted to add some different little spots and details to my conch shell, so I'll do that with these same markers. Just kind of blending that out and adding a little bit of extra personality to that shell. And then I am going to darken that up even further by taking away the E53 and adding in the E59. And I'm going to do the coconut shell for my little tropical drink. And this is also going to be shaded on the right with the highlight on the left. Then I'll switch to some red tones. I'm using R24, R29, and R39 for the rest of the stripes on my lighthouse. So it'll be a red and white striped lighthouse with the black top. And I'm putting that R39 on the left once again. And then I'll blend across with the R29, making sure I leave a nice area there for the highlight. The R24 has a bit of a coral tone to it, so it's really going to warm this combo up and make it seem very beachy. I wanted to go for a very beachy color palette for today's card, just to be on theme with the imagery. So I'm going to fill in the rest of that lighthouse, just being very careful since reds are notorious for bleeding outside the line. So I'm just being very careful around those edges. And then I'm also going to color in my crab with these tones. So I'll put the R39 on the underside of his claws and his body. And then I'm also going to add a little bit of that to his legs. And then I'll blend that out with the R29 once again. And then I'll add that R24 to the top of his head and his claws, where the light would be shining on him the most. He's going to be directly in the center bottom of the scene, so the light source is going to be directly overhead. So I just want to make sure that as I'm coloring, I'm doing different items that will be spread throughout the scene. That's really going to help pull your eye around it and help you take everything in. I will also do one of the stripes on my beach ball with this combo. This time I'm putting my shadows at the top and bottom so that the highlight will be in the center where it would be reflecting the most light. And then I'll also add it to the little flag on my sailboat. Next, I'll move on to some bright blues. I'm going to use B24, B26, and B29 for the hull of my sailboat. And I'm placing the shading on the left and the right, so it will be equal on both sides, and blending toward the center with that B26, and then filling in with the B24, making sure to scrub over the edge of that B26 so I don't get any harsh lines. Then I'll do another stripe on my beach ball, and I'm just going to skip one. I want every other stripe to be white, and so I'll just fill that in, and then I'm going to do the cap of my little bottle of suntan lotion. Next, I will bring in some turquoise shades using BG34, BG45, and BG49, and I will do the main part of my bottle of suntan lotion, putting my shading on the right and highlight on the left, again just because it's going to go on the right hand side of the card. So I like to lay out my images ahead of time and snap a photo. That way I know where things are going to land on the card. That really helps me figure out the light source for the different objects. I did another stripe on my beach ball, and I'm also going to do the base of my flip-flops with these shades. And to help them look a little bit different, because this is just one stamp stamped twice, I'm going to shade one on the right and one on the left, and that way they'll look like a pair. As I was designing this card, I just knew that I wanted as many different beachy images as I possibly could fit. So I pulled out every stamp set that I thought could work and just started laying everything out, and then through process of elimination, I decided on these 4 stamp sets. I just felt like the images fit the best for the design that I had in mind. So I've moved on now to some light aquas with BG10 and BG11, and I'll do the sail of my sailboat. And then I'm also going to add in a little bit of the colorless blender to soften the edge of the BG10 into the white cardstock, so it'll just fade a bit. And then I'll also do that for the white stripes of my beach ball. So the BG11 first, blending out with the BG10, and then a little colorless blender to soften that into the white. I'm going to do that for the label of my suntan lotion, the inner rim of the coconut shell. I'll also do the shovel in my sand pail and the little handle with this same combo. Then I wanted to bring in a salmony pink, and so I went with R00, R11, and R02, and I will do the bucket with these shades, putting my shading on the right and my highlight on the left, starting with the R02, blending out with the R01, and then using the R00. I also did the sun on the suntan lotion and the umbrella in my coconut drink. I did the center circle of the beach ball and the straps of my flip-flops. Then I colored in the starfish with this combo, and I did put my shading more on the left because it was originally going to go on the left-hand side of the card, but I ended up moving it toward the right, but I don't think it's too big of a deal. I also added a little of that pink to the inner part of the conch shell, And I gave the crab some rosy cheeks, but it didn't really show up very well on top of the red. Then I went back to my BG10 to do the glass of my lighthouse. And then I went back to my toner grays, but just some lighter shades to do my sand dollar. And I accidentally stamped it upside down, so I'm just shading it correctly so that the shading will be on the bottom once I flip it over. And then I'm going to do the top of my palm tree, and I went with some more blue toned greens, some cool toned greens, so that it would still match with the color palette that I'd been using. So I used G14, G16, and G19 for that. And I concentrated more on the two darker shades since they were more in that cooler tone. The G14 has a bit of yellow to it, so I only used that very sparingly. And then I actually went over the G14 with the BG34 just to help it fit in a bit more with that color palette. Then I took a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and went over the eyes of my crab and trimmed these images out with their matching dies. So for my background, I wanted to do a one layer background, so I knew that I was going to have to do some masking. So I'm taking a sheet of masking paper that I've trimmed down to the same size as an A2 standard size card, so 4¼ by 5½, and I'm just roughly sketching out the shape of an island as if you were looking at it from the top, so a bird's eye view. And then I'm going to take my Cutter Bee Teflon coated scissors and trim that out. So just carefully cutting that out and using the scissors straight up and down and turning the paper as much as possible so that I can get a smooth cut. I don't want there to be any sharp, rough corners. And then I will remove that mask from the backing and put that in the center of a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock that is also at 4¼ by 5½ inches. So now I want to blend on the colors for my ocean, and I'm starting with some salvaged patina distress oxide ink and just coming in from all four corners toward that mask. I don't want to overlap it too much. I want to leave a tiny bit of a white rim there, but I'm going right up next to it. And then I'm going to bring in the next shade, which is going to be some peacock feathers to darken that up. And I'm just bringing that in and again leaving a little bit of a gap so that I have room for the salvage patina to show up. And I'll go back and forth between those two blending tools to smooth out that transition a bit, but that isn't the final result because I want to go even darker on the outside edges. So I added a bit more of the peacock feathers, and then I'm going to bring in my third shade, which is Uncharted Mariner. And this time I only want to add that to the very edges to make that really nice and dark and just create almost like a halo effect towards the center where the island will be. So I'm just blending that on around the edges, and then I'll go back to the peacock feathers blending tool, smoothing that out, and back to the salvage patina once again. And then once I am happy with how that is looking, I am going to peel off the mask to reveal the space where the island is going to be. And I can save this piece for another project some other time. I'll just put that back on the release paper. For the island in the center, I'm going to start with some antique linen, and I'm going to blend that on and just work my way toward the edges where the blue is. I don't want to go into the blue area, so I'm being very careful to stay within those lines, but I want to fill it in mostly. I don't mind leaving a little bit of white. In fact, we're going to add another detail to emphasize the white. But first I want to darken up the center with some gathered twigs, just blending that on as well. And then I'll go back to my antique linen and smooth that out even further toward the edges. Then I'm going to take the leftover piece from the island that I cut out and just place that over top to work as a mask. And I want to do some splatter detail on the island to make it look more sandy in texture. So I pressed some of both of those inks onto an acrylic block, added a bit of water to make them more fluid, and I'm just tapping that all over the background. I'm using a thin paintbrush so that I can get a really fine splatter detail because I think that looks a little bit more like sand. And then I can remove that masking paper to reveal the island. Then to pull this whole background together and make it look like there are waves crashing up against the shore, I'm taking some white acrylic paint. This is Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White, but any white acrylic paint would work. You just want to have very little on your brush. And I'm just pouncing that along the edges of the island so that it has that kind of lacy texture that the waves create as they come against the shore. So I'm just adding that all over, just dabbing it here and there, and only dipping back into the paint when I need to pick up a little bit more, but you want to have more of like a dry brush texture. And then I also decided that I wanted to have a few little areas in the water itself to be some different ripples coming in, so I'll add those as well. Just a couple to emphasize that water. And where I thought it got a little bit dark, I just took my finger and kind of pounced it over it to lift some of that paint up. You could also use a paper towel, but it was just easy to use my finger to soften that just a little bit. And then I'm going to set this aside to dry. In the meantime, I'm going to work on my sentiment. So I'm going to pop a piece of lawnfawn mermaid cardstock into my MISTI, and I'm using a sentiment from Magic Messages, which I will stamp in peacock ink. And I'm going to stamp that down twice to make sure it's nice and bold. And then I can set that aside, and I'll pop my card base in my MISTI, which is another piece of mermaid cardstock that I've scored and folded to a standard A2 size card. And I'm stamping in the sandcastle and the sentiment, "You brighten my life," on the inside, so that we have a little bit of a carryover from the outside to the in. I have trimmed down the background with the outside in stitch rectangle stackables so that it just shaves off the barest bit of the background, so we get a little bit of the cardstock showing through, which is going to frame it up nicely. So I'm just adhering that to my card base with the glue tube, making sure that is nice and straight on there, and then I will bring in my images and my sentiment. And I did trim down that sentiment with the matching Magic Messages die. I'm going to add that right to the center of my card, and then I'm going to build my scene around that. And I have added foam tape to the back of everything so that it would be popped up and have some nice dimension. So I'll just peel off the release papers and start adding things in place. So the lighthouse is going to go on the left-hand side, and then I'll have the rock just below it. And then I'm going to balance that out on the right-hand side with the palm tree. And then I was just testing it to see whether or not I wanted the palm fronds to go over the sentiment or behind it, or one of each, but I ended up just overlapping. And then I'm going to place the sailboat right below that. So it's kind of a different layout for this card. I actually have done this layout once before, but it was a completely different theme. It was like a woodland birthday card using lawnfawn, and I really loved how it turned out, and so I just thought I would try it again with a very different theme and see how it turned out, and I think I like this one equally as well. It's just something fun and different rather than creating a scene card, which I also love to do, but sometimes it's nice to just try something a little bit more abstract. So next I'm going to add my crab, and I realized that I did not need the foam tape behind his claws because they were going to overlap the sailboat and the rock. So I'm just going to place him down at the bottom, and then I'll add the coconut drink into his left claw. And again, I didn't need the foam tape for that since it was completely covering the rock. So I'll just go back to my glue tube and add a little bit of liquid glue to that and then get that situated. I wanted it to be just tipped slightly to just create a bit more whimsy. And then I'm going to fill in the last little spot up at the top. So the starfish was supposed to go in the spot where the sand dollar is now, but I decided to swap it with the bottom right area there just to spread that kind of corally pink color down towards the bottom of the scene as well. So I've got my conch shell and my sand dollar up at the top left. And then I have the flip-flops, which I'm going to have to tear off some of the foam tape for those as well because they're also going to overlap that rock. But first I'll go ahead and adhere the starfish and the suntan lotion bottle. Just tucking that in. And then, like I said, I'm going to just tear off half of the foam tape that I've added to the back of the flip-flops because I still need it for the lower part so that they'll be well supported. But I will go back to the glue tube for the top section that will overlap the rock. And then I'll just fit those in place. And then all that's left is the two seagulls from Life is Good that I just stamped in jet black ink. So I'll add those to the top. And then of course I had to add a bit of Stardust Stickles. I just have a hard time creating a card without it. It's such a pretty embellishment. So I'm going to add that here and there kind of throughout the card so that we get little flashes of sparkle when you tip it into the light. It's a subtle detail, but I do think it adds a lot to the card, and it fits so well with a beachy scene where the waves would be reflecting the light and the sand would be sparkling in the sunshine. So to me, it just feels appropriate. So I'm going to finish up with that, and once I am done, I will pick this card up to show it to you a little bit more closely so you can see all of the detail and hopefully catch some of the sparkle and shine. And I'll also give you another peek at the inside. And that is going to finish this one up. It's a bit of a different layout, but I really hope that you enjoyed it and that maybe you'll give it a try yourself. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I love to read your feedback. And thank you so much for watching. I hope that you all have an absolutely amazing day, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.